Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is right around the corner, releasing in less than 2 months. Being so close to its release date, we now have more information about the release, including the fact that it's going to be the first PS5 game that comes on 2 discs when you purchase the physical copy. Now this shouldn't really surprise any fans of the franchise, as Final Fantasy VII Remake for the PS4 required 2 discs as well, and the franchise has sort of become well known for this, with the first instance being the original Final Fantasy VII being split into 3 discs back on the PlayStation 1. But it wasn't just for variations of Final Fantasy VII. Final Fantasy VIII and IX both required 4 discs in order to play. Final Fantasy XIII came on 3 discs, and those are just the ones that I personally remember owning. For all I know, there may be more. So how is it that Final Fantasy VII and VIII for the PlayStation 1 required a total of 7 discs in order to play them, yet now there's a tiny Nintendo Switch cartridge that has an HD remaster of both games on it? Well, there are a few reasons for that, but it mostly boils down to advancements in technology. When Final Fantasy VII released back in 1997, there was so much hype around it, with the absolutely huge success that was Final Fantasy VI, regarded by many as one of the best RPGs ever. The expectations were quite high, and with Square Enix choosing to partner with Sony instead of Nintendo as they had always previously done, this added fuel to the fire because the rumors were this decision was made due to Square believing that Nintendo 64 cartridges would not have enough storage to fit Final Fantasy VII without heavy compromises. While those graphics may not look very impressive by today's standards, the jump from 2D to 3D that took place from Final Fantasy VI to VII was a huge leap for the series. And not only were those 3D in-game graphics demanding of storage, the large amount of 3D pre-rendered cutscenes that the Final Fantasy franchise has become well known for also ate up a ton of storage. Back then, an N64 cartridge had between 4 and 64 megabytes of storage, whereas a disc for the PlayStation 1 could fit up to 600 megabytes of data on it. Now, Final Fantasy VII had a file size of roughly 1.5 gigabytes, or 1500 megabytes, hence why even with the PlayStation 1's disk storage being as big as it was, this game still needed to be split across 3 discs. This also shows why Square Enix was right to make the decision they did switching from Nintendo to PlayStation, as without heavily compressing the game, Final Fantasy VII would have required about 24 Nintendo 64 cartridges. So yeah, that probably wouldn't have worked well. Now back to what I said before about advancements in technology. During the PS2 era, we saw some of the largest Final Fantasy games up until that point, with Final Fantasy X requiring about 3 gigabytes. However, they were able to fit all of this onto one disc, as the discs for the PS2 were able to hold between about 5 gigabytes and 8.5 depending on whether or not it was a dual-layer DVD. Final Fantasy X, 11, and 12 all felt like absolutely massive games, but those technological advancements allowed for them to each be on one disc. It seemed like this would be the case for the foreseeable future, but with the introduction of things like high-definition video, Final Fantasy XIII once again required multiple discs, at least for the Xbox 360 version. You see, much like the PlayStation 2, discs for the Xbox 360 were limited to the storage capacity of a dual-layer DVD, about 8.5 gigs. During this era, Sony utilized Blu-ray technology for the PlayStation 3. Love it or hate it, Final Fantasy XIII is one of the best looking games for this console era. I'm actually replaying the game now, and it still looks amazing even by today's standards. As you could probably guess though, this means the file size for the game was massive, around 20 gigabytes. For the PS3, this was no problem, as Blu-ray discs could hold up to 50 gigabytes. However, for the Xbox 360, once again, Final Fantasy XIII was split up into 3 discs. This was one of those somewhat rare scenarios where the PS3 version of the game was the clear better choice. Now for about 10 years between the release date of Final Fantasy XIII, March of 2010, up until 2020, we saw all Final Fantasy games released only requiring one disc, but Final Fantasy VII Remake for the PS4 once again required multiple discs. The biggest difference is games these days don't really run the same way they did back in 1997. With the PS1 era Final Fantasy games, you would have to swap discs at certain points in the game, usually about 10 to 20 hours into it. 2020's Final Fantasy VII Remake has one disc simply for the installation of the game and a separate disc you put in when you're playing. Old PC games have been doing this forever, and from the research I've done, this is because having that data disk installed first allows most of the game to be installed onto the hard drive, which speeds up load times, and the remainder of the game will be on the play disc. While this kind of makes sense for the PS4, I don't think I was the only one who was a little bit shocked to see that Final Fantasy VII Rebirth for the PS5 will also require 2 discs. Unlike those older Final Fantasy games, Final Fantasy VII Remake was not the largest PS4 game, and Final Fantasy VII Rebirth will not be the largest PS5 game. So why do these games require multiple discs when games with larger file sizes like Call of Duty Modern Warfare only require 1? Well, the truth is, we don't have a 100% definitive answer to that, but given the circumstances, it's pretty easy to speculate. Square marketed the original Final Fantasy VII as the largest RPG ever, and even though having multiple discs was actually a requirement, they used this requirement as a selling point for the game, basically flexing, hey, look at how big our game is. And it worked. Final Fantasy VII sold over 14 million copies, a staggering 10 million more than Final Fantasy VI, which was considered a huge success. Square Enix has always marketed Final Fantasy as the biggest RPG with the best graphics and the best cutscenes, so it really shouldn't surprise anyone that they are still using this as a bit of a marketing gimmick when it comes to the trilogy remake for Final Fantasy VII. This helps give the impression of the games being massive, which of course is what Square Enix wants people to believe. But on top of this, there are a few other reasons for them doing this. Final Fantasy VII Remake and Rebirth are both single-player games. I believe Square Enix wants consumers that may not have access to the best internet at all times to still be able to enjoy the games. When a game like Call of Duty Modern Warfare comes on a disc, you aren't really getting the full game on that disc, and you actually need to download tons of additional content in order to play the full thing, meaning if you don't have internet, you're basically screwed. With Final Fantasy VII Remake and Rebirth, you can actually play those full games, minus whatever updates or patches come out, with just the physical discs, which I think is pretty cool as it's a bit of a rarity these days. Even with Final Fantasy XVI, there was a big emphasis on being able to play the game without needing internet. Now, I believe the last reason for having multiple discs is simply tradition. Final Fantasy has become so well known for this over the years that I feel like it's not even really required. Square Enix just likes to do this. It's kind of their thing. While I don't think it's necessary, I do believe that the previously mentioned point about games being fully playable without internet is a good idea overall. So I'm all for it, whatever the reasons are. So hopefully this video answered that question for any of you out there that are wondering. No, Final Fantasy games these days in 2024 don't actually need multiple discs in order to run, which is why you can purchase full digital versions of the games. But it's just something that Square uses to help with marketing them as the largest RPG games, and it does allow people without internet to be able to still enjoy them. Now, if this video did clear up any information for you, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel, and comment down below letting me know if you'll be purchasing Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. I know I'll be pre-ordering it personally. As always, take care guys, and I'll see you in the next one.